All right, so welcome to the Mississippi River Network's River Days of Action, June 10th to June 20th, Lunch and Learn, Thursday, June 17th, Relay of Voices with Victoria Bradford Styrbicki.
Close.
Close. We'll work on that. I'll let Victoria and Tom introduce themselves much more and about their really inspiring project that is ongoing, Relay of Voices. Before we do that, we will just move on to the next slide here, please. Just by a quick introduction, thank you all for joining us today. My name is Michael Anderson. I'm the Outreach and Engagement Manager for the Mississippi River Network. I'm based here in Dakota Homeland near the Bedote, the confluence of the Minnesota and Mississippi Rivers, in present-day Minneapolis, excuse me. MRN, the Mississippi River Network, if you haven't heard about us, we are a organization, a coalition of nearly 60 member organizations and businesses, nonprofits from the Headwaters all the way down to the Gulf, working together to protect and care for the Mississippi River. And so today, and this is part of our River Days of Action, which is occurring from June 10th to June 20th. We have over 40 events happening within this 10-day period in every state that the river touches and flows through, even some other events outside of the main 10 main stem states and across the 32 state watershed. I'm just saying all of this just to help root us in to the enormity of this Mississippi River watershed, right? And so welcome all. The network has the only national public program of its kind that is dedicated to engaging and connecting people with the river, and that is called One Mississippi. One Mississippi has built a community of 20,000 river citizens, and river citizens are people that pledge to take action for the river. And so our over 60 Mississippi River Network members implement the One Mississippi program locally. And so we encourage everyone today, if you haven't yet, to be sure to become a river citizen. We send out monthly emails with different events, opportunities, and advocacy actions for the river. And look, from armchairs to wading boots, everyone can become a river citizen, okay? These are people that want to stand up and take action for the river, and through simple ways, we make a big difference together. So if you haven't already become a river citizen, please cruise over to onemississippi.org and sign up. All right, and while you're at One Mississippi becoming a river citizen, of course, check out the full list of River Days of Action events. Again, there are over 40 happening, and there's still a good number remaining for this final weekend of River Days of Action. And so, of course, action. Well, let's take action to protect the Mississippi River together. And so we have a public petition that is accompanying all River Day of Action events, and we're inviting all of our river community to join in together and take this collective virtual action, and that is to sign this public petition supporting a new vision for our Mississippi River that focuses on restoration, resilience, and equity. And we're going to hear a lot more about this petition later on in our event here today. But it's focused on 4 areas of work, and that is improving water quality, restoring habitat and natural systems, eliminating aquatic invasive species, and building local resilience to natural disasters, all while prioritizing investments in communities of color and economically disadvantaged communities all along our river. So there are 3 ways in which you can take action and sign this petition. And the first is by visiting the short link, which is bit.ly/MRN public petition. We'll share that in the chat, so it's just easy to click on and go right to the petition page. Otherwise, you probably have a smartphone sitting right next to you. Go ahead, take the smartphone out, open up your camera, and you point it at this QR code, which is kind of like this log jam looking thing of black and white squares on your screen. This will automatically pop up the petition link via the QR code. Really quick, easy 10-second action. And I will mention, we have a pretty audacious, ambitious goal of 5,000 signatures within these 10 days of River Days of Action. And we are making great progress on that. We're happy to report that we are almost at 700 signatures. And if everyone that's on this meeting today signs the petition by 1 p.m., we will hit that next milestone of 700 signatures. So let's be the group. Let's take action together to help protect our river. And now we're going to transition onto the stars of today's show. Now that we're oriented into the Mississippi River watershed, the Mississippi River Network, the One Mississippi program, River Days of Action, and our universal call to action through this petition, I'm going to pass it off to the stars of today's Lunch and Learn and send it over to Pat Nonnelly. Pat?
I'm hardly the star, but I'm the moderator, so we'll take it. Welcome to the last of the 3 Lunch and Learn programs. These have been very exciting and interesting, and I'm looking forward to how this one closes us off. I'm Pat Nonnelly from the University of Minnesota. I'm on the steering committee of the Mississippi River Network, and I'm coming to you from Dakota Homeland in St. Paul. I've worked with Dakota people for a long time, and they've taught me, I'm going to mispronounce this, I apologize, Makoche Kinde Dakota Tamakoche, which means in this place, the Dakota and the land belong to each other. Today's program goes through the homelands of many indigenous people. Victoria Styrbicki and her project team traverse the entire Mississippi River, and they will offer insights about this amazing journey that she made and others made down the Mississippi a couple of years ago. There will be time for questions at the end. That's put into the program. So I encourage you to use the chat thread or raise your hand. In the interest of time, it's probably better than just having people blurting out questions. But at that point, Victoria, it's all yours.
Oh, shoot. Victoria and Tom, I think you're saying wonderful things right now, but we can't hear you.
You know, you'd think after a year or more of all of this pandemic stuff, we'd have this figured out, but here we are. So again, my name is Victoria Bradford Styrbicki. This is my husband, partner, teammate, collaborator, Tom Styrbicki, and we made up the collaborative team for Relay of Voices, which was a storytelling project that was rooted in a journey on foot down the Mississippi River in 2019. We started in July, ended in November, started at the Headwaters, ended down at the mouth of the river, very literally. And today in our conversation, we'd like to focus on what we call the radical listening practice. That's the foundation of this work. There's a lot of things that went into making Relay happen and into the logistics and the ins and outs of what it was. But at its core, listening is what allowed this to function and to continue working today as a project.
So over the course of the next hour, 45 minutes, you're going to be hearing a couple of themes. One, listening for sure, that's going to carry through. Another one of movement, the importance of physicality, of being in a place physically experiencing it at the human scale. Excuse me. And you know, and then the listening leads to the understanding of story and in hearing a human voice, hearing the voice of the landscape as well, but all weaving into that story, which is another theme. So that movement and physicality, that listening, and then that story that emerges is really what we want you to kind of keep that thread going as we kind of bounce in and out of some of the interactions we had as we traverse the river. And
when we say we traverse the river on foot, We mean that we literally tracked out a course along the river from the headwaters to the mouth that was about 20 to 40 mile increments, where we could have about 104 towns and cities where we stopped and spent time, arranged to meet with different people and different community groups that we could engage and listen to their stories and spend, great deals of time kind of interwoven into the fabric of their lives. 20 to 40 miles seemed feasible to traverse the distance each day. Sometimes we had to cover intervening miles on bike because the terrain wasn't friendly to be running between towns or on roads, but we did again travel on foot. And it really was paramount to build this relationship with the land, to think about not only what was happening on the water, because so many people do canoe or go by boat, but to think about the infrastructure that's built up around the river that connects the town to that water. And how do then those human beings relate to the water? How has their lives been kind of shaped by the water because of the fields, because of the dirt, because of the factories, because of all of those different structures and conditions surrounding the Mississippi or built off of the Mississippi. And so we were able to truly absorb that in the landscape as we ran on these roads, on these different pathways to get from town to town.
So we were always careful. Victoria mentioned we did do a little biking in some of the intervening miles where we needed to, but we were always careful to depart from a town in the morning on foot, running, experiencing the landscape of that community, often joined by members of the community who would run with us, who would open windows and wave to us. It was equally as important to run then into the receiving community and experience it at that very human scale, powered by your own muscles, breathing that humid air, feeling the heat and the bugs hitting you on the side of the face. But really then when you engage with the people and the community, you're in their world. And that was so important to us as a principle when we set out. And then when we were actually in the middle of this, that importance just became so paramount and so much a ritual and really a key principle of the entire relay.
And what we haven't mentioned so far was where did this idea come from, and how did this all get shaped, and what is kind of the background of this work? And my job and kind of my background is as a social choreographer. So I'm looking at life as a dance most days. How do we as human beings move through the world? How do our actions and gestures and behaviors and routines, how do those shape a story? And how can we create meaning through our lives in that way and understand each other through those facets? And so when I looked at the river, I saw a stage, and I saw the movement of everyday life along that river as a performance that we could engage with, and those people as the performers that we would be interacting with and learning their stories by doing so. And so this whole project has been a performance, a durational performance of 120 days down the river that we got to take part in, that we got to highlight and focus and zoom in on for that time period, and then extract those stories that people were willing and generous enough to share with us and let us into their worlds. And so that is part of what that listening that we spoke of is, this radical whole body listening, and that we were listening deeply to those actions and gestures, those routines and rhythms each day as we sat down with someone here like Salone Anthony in Anthonyville, Arkansas, and he led us into his world. He opened up his stories, his beliefs, his whole community opened up to us. And this is a small community of maybe 100 people out in the fields in Arkansas outside of West Memphis. And it was through one connection after another that we were able to even create this relationship, but through that kind of openness and just kind of following a path that we were able to find this opportunity and find his story leading into our journey.
So we often started an interaction like this, and there were sort of scheduled interactions, and then of course there were countless informal ones, people along the way at a service station or just someone we bumped into on the side of the road. But anyway, we often started an interaction by asking someone, why do you make this place home? Kind of as an open question. And it often allowed us to see this place through their eyes. But often it was more than their words that showed us why they made this place home. They would want to show us something in their community, or they wanted to take us through a portion of their day, or talk about a memory or a piece of history that was important to them. And again, it was those gestures that then became part of that story they told us. And then of course the movement with them, through their community, through their day often, in hearing about their movement through their life in these places really formed that understanding of the story. And we're going to share a few of those stories with you here, very brief, but hopefully give you a glimpse of some connectivity, but also the wonderful diversity of voices along the river.
And I imagine some of you know this man, Hokan Miller, perhaps very well known in the St. Paul Harbor. And we had the great honor to spend 2 days with him and learn about the movement of the working river, of life on the water and life off the water, and the transitional rhythm that happens moving between those two places, and what that's like for a lifetime, from starting as a deckhand and then eventually getting into a position where you are living life off the water again on land and in more of an engineer's position. And we heard this rhythm and this relationship to the water and this kind of language that is spoken between river workers, echoed by so many different people up and down the river that we met. Mike Sandige, who was working with Hokan, a younger river worker, Ken Rowan, a much older generational river worker who we met in Prescott, who had spent time on the St. Croix River, who told a story of jumping off the boat and climbing over the balcony of his wife's house so that he could get some provisions, and then getting back onto the boat later, late into the night, sneaking back on. And Ed Lum of Port Gibson, who we met just as he had gotten off the boat in Cairo, a longtime captain. These stories, these people that we met and that shared hours and hours with us, and understanding this language of river workers. And again, we can't tell you all of those stories here today, but this is part of the work we're doing, is to extract those stories and begin weaving them together and documenting them.
In really realizing or revealing that connectivity, and here it's among river workers, again, all the way down to the mouth of the river, in hearing stories that weave together that are shared and sometimes different, but realizing, just like the MRN, there's this beautiful connectivity and there's this network of shared lives that we can tap into. And we can tap into it at a human scale and on a human basis. And that is, again, this was a 120-day durational performance, a dance that sort of stood alone. It was a 2-person relay, one of us running at all times. But that was not the end of it. There's so much more, and we'll tell you a little bit about, some of the things that have come out of that 120-day relay. But anyway, one of them is that connectivity, and we hope that we can help build that network and help institutions, organizations like the MRN realize that and realize their goals. So we've got Frankie Johnson on the screen here now. This is a great story. This is St. Paul. You might recognize Kellogg Mall Park, overlooking the river. We had an evening event there where Frankie was one of the first speakers to talk about the importance of listening. And to our great delight, without any prompt, Frankie turned to us and said, you're going to be listening to people, you're going to be listening to voices, but he said, make sure you're listening to the voice of the landscape as well. Pardon me. So here at the Bedote, this sacred confluence, we have Frankie come out and speak to us, to our hearts, about the work we were doing and the importance of it. And it really gave us that validation. And we set off towards Prescott and towards the Prairie Island Indian community with renewed vigor at that point.
And the very next day at Prairie Island, we were invited to go see the new buffalo herd that they've been raising, and a revival of their ancestral spirit and sustenance to their community, learning how the land and the ecosystem are all part of one greater whole. And that is another thing, listening to that lesson and seeing that we again heard echoed again and again, that the land is teaching us something, that the ecosystem is teaching us something, that those stories of the human beings, that our own stories are kind of woven into this place that we are, that the water and its kind of relationship to where we are all connected. And we saw that again much further downriver in Angela Chalk's story in New Orleans, where she is looking at the ecosystem of climate change, of storm surge, of her own neighborhood being cut off by a huge interstate from what is otherwise a more natural and kind of welcoming environment. She's deciding, okay, we need to be advocates and activists. I need to reach out to my community members, and we can learn how to participate in this conversation and not just be silent and not just be run over. And so she's teaching her neighbors how to plant trees, build rain gardens, to go to town halls and to be a part of this larger conversation, so that they are not left out whenever a big storm comes through, that they're not the ones that are bowled over. And this work is again that sense of understanding, of having a larger sense of that whole, of that ecosystem. And it's a wonderful work that she is doing in the 7th Ward.
It's a great model too, Angela Chalk, building that sort of understanding at the very small neighborhood level in the 7th Ward about, again, what tree plantings can do, rain barrels and rain gardens, and then building their knowledge. These are underrepresented, often overlooked, maybe intentionally overlooked communities who now have the understanding, they have the voice, they have the confidence to take on these larger issues that are affecting them at a much greater scale. The one thing I wanted to say about Angela, and I think as we transition into our next voice here, we got to know Angela first on a very personal level. We sat down in her living room there. She was watching a football game. We spent the first, probably close to an hour or more just talking about her life and her upbringing. She introduced us to a new term, Baptist, from a Catholic background, but also from a Baptist background, and the interplay of those two sort of heritages, within her. But anyway, just having that human sort of understanding of Angela, then talking about the more technical things and
issue-oriented things.
It really built a deeper conversation, just like the next one we'll talk about here. Roger Krieger in Burlington.
Yeah, Roger, is one man. He's a farmer, and he's listening to the needs of his farm and of his land, his few hundred acres. He's planting cover crop. He's rotating. He's thinking about fertilizer runoff. He's thinking about the things that you guys are talking about in some of these larger issue-based presentations we've seen. But he's one dot on the map, or maybe not even big enough to be a dot on one of those maps. And yet I hope he still counts, because he's one voice, and he's working for his farm, and it's a small farm, but it is what so many others need to be doing. And we hope that one story could influence another person, and that testimony can make a difference if we have it to offer up. And listening to Roger taught us something about listening, about how to find those stories, because he wove an intricately difficult, sometimes meandering like the river tapestry of stories about his wife almost being killed by a combine, about his love for his father-in-law whose land he inherited, about his cows and his affection for his cows. And yet in all of that, we also heard about these very serious issues about what's going on with farming. And it's through the patience of listening that we learned not only was these important, global issues, but we learned the beauty and poignancy of some of those other issues that have a human kind of impact, and that also can come to bear and be relevant in those larger global issues.
You can hear, a person can hear about a certain tonnage of runoff from fields that goes into the Mississippi River or into impaired waters. But when you sit down and you talk to an actual person who is part of this cycle and just learn where they're coming from, it gives you a little bit different perspective and maybe a little bit different approach to dealing with it. And again, here was a very enlightened farmer who was doing everything he could. And we look at that sometimes and think he's that one small piece, and what can that possibly matter? Another discovery or reveal that came to us as we went down the river is every small piece matters. And you folks know that already. One at a time is all it takes. And that's the power of understanding a person and a story.
And that's also what we heard, this listening and finding the one at a time moment, and the moment where the movement of the body and the physicality of two older men really spoke to us and brought us into basically some kind of magical landscape of storytelling, was with Keith Butler and Mel Losch. Keith sharing this story of Lobo, the wolf who ran rampant across Itasca, and Algot, the man who caught him finally out. And then Mel Losch, the Ojibwe bead and quill work artist, who spoke with such a quietness, a gentleness, a slowness, where his arms would float like he floated through the room, and the whole space in his home, in his studio, just sounded. The colors sounded, the textures sounded, and you were enveloped in him. And these two men were two of hundreds that we encountered that carried that gravity of a person and of a story. And that's another thing we learned to listen for in this experience.
Yeah, we learned to observe these overt actions, a fist on the table or a holding of the hands. But those actions become deeper, become behaviors, becoming kind of ingrained in the body of the person. And then we even felt this deeper level where they become actual gestures, which are something beyond just the physical movement. There's something almost spiritual about it, if I could say.
And in terms of spiritual, we experienced gestures and movements and kind of an overwhelming awe when we got the chance to attend church at the Old St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church. And this 2.5-hour experience on a hot Sunday in West Memphis, we had both run our portion into town over the bridge from Memphis and changed our sweaty bodies in the van, cleaned up into our Sunday best, if you will, to look appropriate for church, as my mom warned me, you better look your best. And we went in and we definitely looked out of place, but we were welcomed, and the singing and the preaching and the praise Jesus and everything was just enormous and told its own story. And we wouldn't have been there And we wouldn't have had that experience had it not been for this man, Fred Leonard, who, talk about listening to a place. He had his own story of listening to West Memphis. He came out of, was it Jackson? And he drove through, he was driving through West Memphis after visiting his parents, and he stopped, he pulled off on the highway, and he had his granddaughter in the back of the car, and she said, well, why are we coming here? Why are we doing this? And he was like, I don't know. And she's like, are we moving here? And he was like, well, maybe. And he said, you know, I just had to drive through some of those blighted areas and just see this town. I just felt called to see what was happening in this town. And, you know, and then it was God who told me I had to move here. And I had, you know, this was a place where there were all white people doing all the top jobs, leading the people. And it was a primarily Black American community. And we needed to build a community of Black leaders to make change and make a difference in this town. And the thing is when I went there to plan my trip, to plan this journey, I was in a room full of white leaders, 14 white people and Fred. And he came up to me at the end of that meeting. He said, if you need anything, you let me know. And in the end, he was the one who came through and helped organize our time there and made the difference that it was. Because it's a Sunday in West Memphis, what else are you going to do but go to church? So it's just listening to people, to who you're talking to the situation, to knowing and not being afraid of where you're going, to understanding the situation. And Fred definitely taught us that. Similarly, Dr. Tarver in Baton Rouge had a lot of wisdom to share. And here at Southern University, we got to talking about a lot of difficult issues and a lot of difficult issues facing the Black community, one of which is the Confederate monuments and all of that news that had been recently circling in the press. And he said, you know, he was happy that those monuments had come down in New Orleans and that they were, you know, had done it at the right time, but that if you want to put them in a Confederate park, which is what was happening, then you go do that and you go visit that park if you want to, maybe for history, maybe for art, but it's, you know, it's your own choice. And the answer for this, he said, is always embedded in the spirit of the community in which they occur. And it varies from place to place. And he could be on any side, he said. And that wisdom was one of many that Dr. Tarver shared with us. And again, these opportunities to be with these people and to listen deeply and to gather their stories and to find ways to share them is just something that we are cherishing for sure.
Yeah, and really that was a transformational day among many along the journey. But to hear and to experience in Dr. Tarver that ability to not polarize and to understand different positions, to have your own thoughts and your own opinions, but be able to empathize or recognize how someone else arrived at the position they're at. And this was made all the more powerful. We were in the museum there at Southern University, probably yards away from a monument and a place where two young Black men were shot by police during a peaceful protest in 1972, Denver Smith and Leonard Brown. And we went and spent some time, you know, observing that monument and kind of rethinking that moment. But anyway, for Dr. Tarver to be sort of so enlightened and forward thinking in this place of such great gravity was really transformational to hear. And you know, again, sometimes our conversations were challenging. We were hearing things that maybe we would personally disagree with, but we were always listening, trying to understand the person and not to immediately jump to a conclusion about who they are and where they're coming from. And Sandy Hart was a perfect example of that.
Yeah, Sandy had some really hard to meet views about the Confederacy and slavery, but we tried to meet her in her own place, to listen toward understanding, because we wanted to know her on a human scale, to be able to have a conversation with her, to have her listen to us as well, and to find some common ground. So we couldn't build walls. And that's what we had to work to do on several occasions, not just with Sandy. And that was another lesson in listening. You have to have some lines that you draw, but you also have to learn how to stay open enough where you can build relationships.
In really, again, this whole body listening with all your senses, but listening not just to the issues or the question you may have asked, listening to that person reveal themselves to you, to help you understand them.
And another story of someone really revealing themselves to me was Lee Salisbury, a gentleman in Alma, Wisconsin, who in a very generous and vulnerable moment shared with me his story of alcoholism, how he lost everything, his whole livelihood, and almost injured himself irreparably. And he knew, we were talking candidly. He knew I was recording him. He was just open, and he felt trust, and I felt care, that was what was needed in that moment. And in a similar situation, again, addiction followed us. It follows you everywhere, obviously, but it's no stranger on the river. And we found it again in Natchez with Stratton Hall, a good friend now, who shared her troubles with addiction that she has overcome. And again, that vulnerability that people are willing to kind of open themselves up, and
when they know you're listening and they know you're caring, they'll open themselves up.
Another kind of unique situation in terms of listening that we encountered was with Louis Gedden here in Churchill, Mississippi. He is a sidearm carrying, AR-15 wielding farmer, and has some very conservative views, but we felt that was a great opportunity for us to ask some questions about his views, about poverty in the area, about his farm labor, and to see where he stood, and maybe not to prejudge that Louis was going to be on one side or the other. And in fact, he had some of the most progressive ideas about how to get people out of welfare, get them back working a job. And it was enlightening and refreshing, truly.
And just to kind of see Louis as a person and how people can differ in their views, we sat down with Louis and his good friend and neighbor, George and Linda Bates. We stayed with the Bateses. And in here, we spent some time with the Bateses. You hate to paint people with one brush or another, but very much leaning on a much more liberal side of views towards politics and really everything. And yet they were good friends, wonderful friends, here sitting down to dinner with us in almost celebrating those differences as something that's natural and beautiful, and not letting that polarize them. It was a beautiful evening in that respect, and really, again, just ingrained in us that idea that we are not binary. We are a spectrum of thoughts and opinions, and we can all fit together.
And finally, we get to Albertine Kimbrell. You may also have heard of her. She's an amazingly loud coastal advocate down in Louisiana. And she is a self-proclaimed duck queen, and she'd like to tear that levee down and let the river water flow over her property on the east bank, to build back up the marshes, and just replenish the land from the subsidence. Now, this doesn't sound so good to Mitch Jurasich, the oyster king, as she refers to him. He wants his oysters to survive and not have all that fresh water. But despite their differences, Albertine and Mitch are fighting to save the same ecosystem. And Albertine knows it's about listening to one another in order to make progress. And so she's trying to work with Mitch and with other oystermen and across the state, with all the coastal master plan, to make that happen. So we're at 12:45. We're conscious of time. And at this moment, we had originally planned to share with you a brief performance of Albertine. But because of time, we might skip that and just direct you to go to our website, and we'll put this in the chat. This new website that's a sister site of our relayofvoices.com is called Alluvium Theater, and it's a site where basically I've been taking 1 minute of our document footage from these interactions with all of these wonderful people that you've been hearing briefly about, and reperforming that 1 minute through gesture, through words, through a few different props. And so right now we have a little over 50 voices of the river performed. And we did Albertine earlier this morning, so you can see her as well. And please check that out and let us know what you think. And more will be coming. We have over 600 voices of the river documented that need to be released in some form or fashion. And this is just one way for us to share those voices of the river.
And that term alluvium was intentional, obviously. After this sort of movement and this flow of 120 days down the river, there's all this sediment, this fertile sediment that's falling out, that we're now realizing that we're back home here in Stillwater, Minnesota. And just wanted to kind of give you a glimpse of this juxtaposition of two different worlds that occurred in late 2019. November 5th, we were at the end of Southwest Pass, the Gulf of Mexico, on our final day on a boat, the Plaquemines Parish fireboat, and then took a very rapid journey back to Minnesota, from very warm weather back to very cool weather. But we were hearing on the way back these news broadcasts of a virus that had been transmitted from animal to human in Wuhan, China. And, this was kind of building and building. And really, by the time we got back from the relay, we went from a world of constant contact and human interaction and just rich human interaction to almost isolation, almost near isolation. And it led to a lot of reflection, a lot of processing of information, ultimately led to some ways to reach back to those river communities and connect with them again.
Right, so we've had these Zoom reunions and we plan to continue doing that. And we hope that some of you will join in. We'll advertise those on our website and through our newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter on our website. The relay walks is something new that we're starting up this season. We're going to be going to Winona and to Helena, and hopefully other towns, to do walks throughout the city that are relays incorporating local residents to help us get the stories of the landscape. And sign the petition. We again are proud at A House Unbuilt to partner and with the Mississippi River Network. We believe that the voices of the river make a difference. So please take action and sign the petition today. And finally, I want to just quickly tell one story that we told almost every day that we were on the river. And it's how we started our journey meeting this man, Terry Larson. He's in his mid-60s, born and raised in Itasca Township, and now lives on Wolf Lake, some 30 or 40 miles away, still along the Mississippi. Family land, Gulfsvik Landing, remains an important fixture of his and his family's life there at Itasca. He's often considered the first man of the river, and he has been interviewed and written about many, many times before. He's a practiced interviewee, coming with prepared stories and recitations, and yet the sentiment feels true and authentic. He launched our time together speaking of his family, history, and land as we met right upon it. And he wandered into a more personal story of his experience with injury, how it changed his life to suffer and overcome pain with much thanks to the river. Almost immediately, in telling us these stories, he waded into the narrow stream called the Mississippi, there at Gulfsvig Landing, to fetter out what he thought was a bottle containing a handwritten message. In the end, this excursion turned into a science lesson as he showed us the precious freshwater sponge growing on the rocks beneath the surface and plucked a few off the rocks for us to keep for our research. Tom held his arm out so as not to slip on the rocks as he climbed out of the cleanest part of the river here at Itasca. And we finally began our recordings and made our way down through the Gulfsvig land to his most special spot for a blessing, some foraging, a poem of majestic dying, and many, many more stories on the day. Nearly 4.5 hours later, we had traveled many circles together, finding ourselves right in the middle of it all. A lesson from Ojibwe warrior, Osawindib, that Terry shared with us. Apparently, he once said to explorers Schoolcraft on his expedition to the source of the Mississippi, "Why is the white man so intent on learning the beginning and the end of everything, when it is the middle that matters?" So I thank you for being in the middle with us today and going forward.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I'm speechless, and people on the call who know me know that I'm rarely speechless. I will hand it off to others. Questions, comments, observations? Joseph. Go ahead, Joseph.
Just clapping, he said.
Wow. So as Victoria was sharing the story right at the end there with Terry, it really
Michael, excuse me a second. Joseph Olmsted raised his hand.
He I believe he did the clapping reaction.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for calling it in though. And so when you were sharing that story, Victoria, with Terry, it took me right back to 2019 and daily checking the Relay Facebook page. And just, I think you all did such an incredible job of not only as you're, sharing these stories as the journey continues now, but in real time. And I'm wondering, perhaps that's another way that folks can learn more and even read some of these stories is through your Facebook page.
Yes, that's a great way.
Cool. And we'd love to open it up. If anyone has a question for Victoria and Tom, it's kind of a privilege to be on with them. Take it away. You can go off mute and just ask something or type it in the chat.
Pat, I did notice a mutual friend down at the bottom of the screen there we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Well, and there's another mutual friend who used to work with me at the Minnesota Historical Society who's now working with you, who joined us also.
I see that.
It's a roundabout way, but we find our ways back to the river.
You were equally inspiring today as you were last year, Tom. This is really great.
Thank you, Tim.
Michael, you have an eye on a clock, so I don't know how much time you need to.
Sounds great. Well, I'll take it from here and close us out with just another another reminder. So this is the petition that we started off, sharing about in the beginning of this event, and Victoria and Tom mentioned it near the end of their presentation, and just wanted to show it. Like, this is what it actually looks like. So if you click the link, I'll share it in the chat again, or that QR code logjam, this is what it brings you to. And it's all about supporting this vision that focuses on restoration, resilience, and equity for our river. And in particular, giving the Mississippi River the respect that it deserves and the attention that it deserves. There are other federal place-based programs like in the Everglades, in the Great Lakes, and with the Mississippi River Network, we really, and all of our partners and collaborators from across the basin, we really believe it's time for the river to get its attention and to get its support. And so that is what this petition is about. And so I'm going to switch over to this slide. Are you all seeing the slide now, or are you still on the petition?
On the slide.
On the slide. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So I'll just go back into present mode, and there it is. If you have your smartphone handy, you can point it at the screen, and that'll immediately open up the petition. Otherwise, I'm also just putting that quick link in the chat as well. And we'll just kind of allow people a minute here to take action, right? We are almost at 700 signatures, and Misa Khan, who was on earlier, our MRN's policy director, had to jump off for another event. And I tell you what, if we were to get the last folks on this call to all sign this petition, that'll be a nice surprise for her. So feel free, visit via the short link and sign the petition, or through the smartphone. And then of course, you can go through onemississippi.org, as well as, while you're there, check out the other 40+ events happening with River Days of Action. There are many in-person and virtual still occurring with the remainder of this weekend, and it's just being put on by people like you and me, just along the river, wanting to work in a collaborative way. And I think that, the stories that we heard today just hit me so close to home and in my heart, of just like coming back to that shared humanity that we all have. And I think the river is, one of the greatest teachers of this, and something we've been talking a lot with these River Days of Action is that, the Mississippi only becomes the Mississippi because of its tributaries, right? And so just like, all of these individual points, these individual story nodes that Victoria and Tom shared with us today, they absolutely matter. And in fact, they are critical to make the whole tapestry, if you will, be what it is. And that's the same exact thing with our great river. It only reaches its grandeur because of all these tributaries flowing in. So I'll leave everyone with that, and we'll just, on behalf of the Mississippi River Network, Victoria, Tom, thank you so much for your time today. I believe that we are very much in the middle in terms of our continued relationship, and I very much look forward to what is to come. So thank you. I will give a special shout out to Pat Nunnally as well, from the University of Minnesota, who is our moderator for today's event, and also many events this week as part of this Lunch and Learn series with the River Days of Action. Pat, thank you deeply for your time. Similarly, I know we're in the middle of our stories too. So, and to all of our friends that have joined today, thank you for your time and energy. I know everyone's schedule is busy. As mentioned in the beginning, this event is recorded, so we'll put it up on YouTube, we'll share it out, and definitely we'll follow up with an email that has all the links to stay connected with A House Unbuilt and Relay of Voices. So thank you all.
Thank you. Nice job.